Welcome to VLGA Connect. I'm Catherine Arndt and you're listening to the national broadcaster on all things local government.
Hi everyone, welcome to VLGA Connect and the weekly TGU panel discussion on all things local government across Victoria and beyond. My name is Chris Eddy. It's great to have you with us. I'm joined by Tony Rownick from Hunt & Hunt Lawyers and Julie Reid from LG Experts. Firstly, Julie, hello to you.
Hi, Chris. Great to see you.
Great
Hope
to
your
have
week's
you
been
back.
well.
Indeed. And Tony Rownick is coming to us live from, I think, Yarriambiack today. Look, we're just so jealous, Tony, of the background that
Oh, I
you've got there this
know.
morning. How are you?
Lovely spot I'm in, Chris and Julie, and viewers may recall that that quite some episodes ago we talked about how Yarriambiack Shire had invested in some cabins for to accommodate workers coming into the municipality, itinerant workers, people coming to address council, etc. And I'm enjoying some of that hospitality with the beautiful Yarriambiack Creek behind me. So feel jealous.
Wow. Wow.
We are jealous.
Great to see you, Tony, from that part
looks
of the world.
fabulous. It really does.
Yeah.
So we're done with elections. The whole thing has, well, when I say that, we're sort of done for most councils, but there's two wards that there's a cloud hanging over. You might have seen the announcement and the press conference with the VEC Commissioner this week, Sven Blumel. Two wards, one in Whittlesea and one in Knox, have been referred to VCAT and to Victoria Police and the Inspectorate over suspicions of vote tampering, postal ballot tampering. This has got echoes of what happened, Tony, 4 years ago with the former Moreland, now Merribeck Council, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and really disappointing when we see that only allegations, something under investigation at the moment. But of course, we hate to hear of these sorts of really undermining of local democracy. If this is true, understand that what has caused the suspicion is that there's this high rate of multiple ballot papers returned, ostensibly from the same voter. So what I'm imagining might happen would be a voter says, I haven't received my ballot pack in the mail, signs a declaration to obtain another one, and then ultimately the VEC notes that there have been two votes received from that voter. I believe what then happens is they would examine the declarations and compare the signatures. You sign when you vote, and you sign when you declare, and subsequently another vote is received, and that's raised some suspicion. So 128 suspicious votes in Layla Ward there in Whittlesea, and 61 in Baird Ward in Knox. And as you say, Chris, unfortunately, this is something that occurred in what was Moreland Council, now Merribeck Council, in the 2020 election. Took quite some time, I think, over 2 years to be, the investigation to be resolved, and ultimately, Councillor Malad El Halabi was declared that he, was unduly elected and had to step down, and ultimately was went through a court process, was fined $20,000, 18-month, correctional order, community-based order. Actually, I might say I wonder whether that's sufficient. I think these sort of attacks on democracy really need to, we need to have really strong sanctions to discourage this sort of behaviour.
We've got to point out that there's been no suggestion as to who might be involved in this, and the two elected councillors in those wards, Stephen Kosmevsky and Peter Lockwood, I think is the other gentleman. They've both told The Age that they've not been involved in any wrongdoing. I guess the sad thing for them is there's this cloud hanging over their election. And as you say, Tony, that Moreland case took, I think it was nearly 3 years ultimately. We don't want to see it dragging out that long, do we? Because it's just not conducive to their effective performance of the role, Julie.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I would agree with that. So Oh boy, it could be some time before they know. That it puts pressure on the councils. It's not an ideal situation, but what can we do? I mean, it's just and it's hard. It's hard, and it's a long process for the VEC to go through. And obviously, the local government inspectorate are sort of looking at this as well in conjunction with them to see what's going on. So.
Well, as
Yeah,
Michael Stefanovic said, serious penalties potentially
yeah,
applying here if
yeah.
this is proven, of fines and up to 5 years imprisonment. So we
Yeah,
are
that's
talking
right.
serious potential
Mm,
repercussions.
that's right.
Tony, I guess one thing that struck me that Sven Blumel said is that this is actually a sign that the system and the process is working, because the VEC has closely analysed and detected this pattern of irregularities, and it hasn't gotten through and unduly affected outcomes without being picked up.
Yeah. I think you could look at it like that, and clearly, it's kudos to them for picking this up in those two different municipalities, and I guess we'd have to, assume that it hasn't happened anywhere else. Um, um, uh, because of that, one of the concerns expressed, certainly you hear about, is that this move to postal voting might be somehow make it more likely to accommodate this sort of level of fraud. But I think, it remains very much the exception,
Yeah.
rather than the norm. I still like postal voting. I think that
Mm,
the attendance voting tends to favour those, people can marshal the supporters out to go to the booze,
mm,
i.e. the political parties,
Yeah.
essentially. And so, if you're a genuine independent, running ultimately by yourself with maybe a few supporters around your friends and family, really hard to compete with that, that established political party bureaucracy that can come out and hand out how to vote cards at voting
mm,
booths. So I'm a supporter of postal voting. The other thing I'd say is that there's been talk about, should a councillor be declared for these wards while the investigation remains underway? My view is yes. I just think that the community can't. You're innocent till proven guilty of
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
B, the community need local representatives in the meantime.
mhm,
But I would expect that with the experience at Marybeck last elections, or the prior elections, then we'd hope to see an expedited process here, that get some answers for that community in a matter of months rather than
mm.
Yeah.
years.
The
Yeah.
VEC in their statement actually said on that point, Tony, that they are required by law to declare the election result for both of those wards before any referrals to VCAT could occur.
Right.
So
Okay.
that's engendered in the
Yeah.
legislation by
Yeah.
the sounds of that.
Chris, just picking up on a point that Tony made, I heard from the VEC yesterday that we've actually had record numbers of people voting this time around. It's actually gone up from what it was at the last election, and that was a postal vote as well. And at the time, we were going through COVID, and we had record numbers at that time during COVID, but it actually has increased across the board, the numbers of people that have actually participated in voting. So I think that that's a good news story, that we've had record numbers this time that have gone up from what it was before. So, I agree with Tony. I think it actually is working quite well. And the proof is in the numbers that have gone up. So
Yeah.
that's fantastic news. The other thing I learned yesterday, which you may already know, but it's pretty clear that the VEC are saying where there are single member wards, it'll only be a by-election. It'll only be a by-election. There'll be no countbacks on single member wards. So they made that really clear, and that was something that was news to me. May not.
Yeah, that's because the proportional
Yeah,
representation system only gets used in those multi-member wards
yeah,
or
yeah.
unsubdivided. That was one of the arguments back when the proposed change was being mooted, that it would have potential additional costs down the track because it would require by-elections rather than countbacks. We're yet to see, of course, how many of those play out. We'll talk about this perhaps
and
a bit.
we did have quite a few, didn't we, play out
We
last
did.
time? We had
I was
quite
just
a few.
going to say, we'll talk about this a little bit with Rhys a little bit later on too. But early in the term last year, I remember we had a number of countbacks and vacancies that appeared, within weeks, really. So whether we see that again this time around, of course, remains to be seen. Okay, so that happened, and we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. I've got a trivia question for you both. Now that it's all run and won, which council has the honour of being the very last to have had its results declared?
Oh,
They're thinking.
it was it either Whittlesea or Darebin? Was it Darebin? No.
No. Neither. No. It was Tony. You're not going to have a guess?
I've read this and I'm racking my brains.
I can't remember. I
It
saw it.
It was Greater Geelong.
I did read that. Yeah.
Oh, Greater Geelong, was it?
It was Greater Geelong, and probably because there were 3 wards that were recounted. So I just wanted to mention that there were quite a number of recounts that happened over the past few days. I sort of read into this a little bit. I think a recount can be requested and generally would be granted if the margin was less than 1,500 votes.
Yeah.
And an interesting thing to note, Tony and Julie, one of those recounts, I think the margin was 8 votes originally, ended up being 16. Another one narrowed from something like 5 to 3, or it might have been slightly higher number, and ended up being 3 votes. That was one of the Greater Geelong ones. So interesting that the recounts did actually deliver a different number, but not a different result.
Gosh. Wow.
Just let that sit there. What does that mean, do you think?
Interesting trivia, Chris, on this lovely morning.
Yeah. All right. So anything else you want to share before we consign these elections to history? Other than the gender issue, which we will be talking about with Rhys and a few other stats, we haven't hit the target of 50-50 that the government was looking for. Unless we get a lot of by-elections between now and next year, the target was 50-50 by 2025. But it's still around that 43% mark in terms of female representation.
Yeah, pretty disappointing, but, we are where we are. But again, just that comment about significant change and long-term people missing out on roles at the table, which we're really surprised about. It's been a time of change, I think, across local government, and that's telling us about what the communities are saying to those councils. It's been a really interesting time, and I think that it will be, I think, quite a challenging 4 years coming up for local government. That's what I'm expecting as a result of this massive change that we've seen.
So a lot of new faces, quite a few incumbents falling by the wayside. Again, Rhys will have some numbers on that a little later on. Speaking of incumbents to make way through unsuccessful re-election campaigns, 2 stellar performers on the VLGA board. The president, Denise Mazood, lost her position on Whitehorse. Suzanne Newton, I think the longest serving of the crop of board members of the VLGA, lost her seat at Darebin. Catherine Arndt, the CEO of the VLGA, paid tribute to both of those women and their extraordinary contribution to the VLGA board over the time that they were there. And we echo that, of course.
Oh, absolutely.
And we congratulate Grace Lavella, who I know really well, out at Central Goldfields Shire, was mayor a couple of years ago. Grace is the vice president and now steps up to be the interim president until elections happen next June, I think it is. So it's sort of mirroring what's happened with the MAV, where David Clark lost his seat, stepped down as president. Jennifer Anderson, the vice president at Macedon Rangers there, has stepped into the presidency until board elections, I think, at the MAV next March. So more change, as you were hinting at, Julie and Tony.
Yeah, and just people that have really devoted a lot of time to the sector, which is what I'm disappointed about, I suppose. And look, this happens. It happens all the time. But the likes of Denise Masood, who I know well from my time at Whitehorse, but the tireless work that she does as a councillor and that she's done for VLGA, I've known of, I've seen a lot of the work that she's done, and she's such a great advocate for local government. So again, you know, with people like that, I'm hoping that they will step up and they will help by, say, maybe giving some time to mentoring new people that are coming through, and they don't let go of local government altogether, because I think they have so much to offer. You know, the sector, you know, going forward. So let's hope that they don't give up on that, and they do put some time back. Suzanne would be the same as well. I don't know Suzanne as well, but you know, there's some wonderful words that have come from how much Suzanne has actually contributed to the sector. So very sad. I liked the farewell message for David Clark from MAV. I thought that was really paying, you know, a fantastic tribute to, again, the contribution that he's made across the sector, being very vocal and being very, very passionate about getting improvements for local government across the board. So I wish them all well, and I'm sure you do as well.
Yeah, well said, Julian. I think it is right. We pay tribute to people like Denise, Suzanne, and David, but also I think, you know, change is, you know, inevitable. And what I like to say, the announcement around Jennifer Anderson coming in, stepping in, 12 years already on Macedon Ranges Council, been on the MAV board for 6 years, stepping into that role that David Clark had, and I think brings some new and valuable experiences there in that role. She's a GP. She's an expert on community health. She sat on the Vic Government Gender Equality Advisory Committee, was chair of Loddon Mallee Region Waste and Resource Recovery Group, and also the peri-urban group of councils. She's shared that before. So I think she's a really, you know, stellar step in. And she'll do she'll you know, walk her own path at the MAV, but I think she'll be an excellent leader.
Yeah, and you're right. I echo that. She's amazing in the way that she works, and she's a really nice person to talk to as well. So, you know, she'll be great for relationships across local government. So yeah, well done to Jennifer. She'll be a great leader.
Absolutely. All right. Let's move on from that. Of course, now that elections are done, councils are being sworn in, and they're turning their minds to who's going to lead them as mayor and, if applicable, deputy mayor for the forthcoming 12 months. Another trivia question for you, Tony and Julie. How many councils do you think, as we're sitting here on Friday morning, have already determined their mayor and deputy for the forthcoming year?
Oh, now, Chris, I did have a handy...
Tony says 10?
10? I did have a handy look at your list that you have on the local government news roundup, which
well, you're very well informed.
Which is very good, but I didn't count them. So, but I was surprised how many already have.
I was too. They're very quick. Some of them
elected.
off the mark. Yes. So 10 is the correct answer, unless I've missed something. Can I just say to some councils, and you can work out who they are from the list on the local government news website, can you please make it clear on your own website when your mayoral election's going to be? Some of them you've just got to trawl and you can't even find it. It's maybe it's because the new group of councillors haven't come together and they want to have some say about when that's going to happen. But yes,
there's going to be a lot of meetings happening on the 18th, 19th and 20th of November, isn't there, Chris? So we're going to have to spread out.
Big week next week.
You know.
Yes. Absolutely.
Try and watch as many as possible.
Can I say maybe a few CEOs will be getting their hats ready? You know,
yes.
If there's a tie, you know, you can pull it out of the hat.
The bingo ball machine. I've seen that before. Well, so far the ones I've seen have been very straightforward. I was struck last night by the Port Phillip statutory meeting, or whatever, you know, they all call it something different these days. How collegiate that group of councillors already seems to be, and the new mayor and deputy were unopposed in being elected, and that was Louise Crawford is mayor again of Port Phillip, was mayor I think in 2021, and Brian Mears as deputy mayor. The others that I'm aware of are Ararat, where Joe Armstrong is back as mayor and Bob Sanders as deputy mayor. Who else have we had this week?
Kate Macon at Corangamite.
Yes, Kate Macon. So that's a continuity one for you, because Kate was mayor in the last term. We've had Hindmarsh, I think, Councillor Ron Ismay has been elected mayor at Hindmarsh. Who else have we had? Georgina Oxley is the new mayor of Kingston, with Chris Howe as the new deputy mayor. We've got, obviously, we already knew, the number's wrong, Tony, because I forgot Melbourne.
Yes,
Ah,
yes, was
yes.
Mayor of
directly
Melbourne.
elected.
Yes,
Nick
directly
Yes.
elected. So the number's actually 11,
11,
if you
yeah.
count that.
Okay.
Monash has elected Councillor Paul Classaris as mayor. They were, I think, the quickest off the mark, with Brian Little elected as deputy. Of course, Brian has been a deputy, has been a mayor too, in that last term of council. So some experience there. Congrats to Councillor Karen Hislop at Northern Grampians, stepping into the mayoral position. Now, here's an interesting one to watch. How many councils, usually those small rurals, don't have deputy mayors? I think there were 5 in the last term. Northern Grampians has bucked their recent practice and decided to go with the deputy. And Justine Hyde has been elected there as the deputy mayor of Northern Grampians. And Surf Coast had their election yesterday. Mike Bodsworth is the new mayor of Surf Coast. He's been deputy for a couple of years. And Libby Stapleton is the deputy mayor. So there you go. You're up to date. I'm not proposing to read them all through next week because, as you say, Julie, we're going to have something like 20, 25 maybe mayoral elections happening next week around the state. Be interesting to watch.
Yeah.
I think Tanya Keogh at Pyrenees and Tim Meyer at West Wimmera were the other two.
Oh, thank you, Tony. Yeah, I knew I was missing a couple, but I just couldn't find them on the list yet. Yes, Tanya Keogh and Tim Meyer. Tim Meyer, of course, previous mayor being re-elected there. So well done, and all the best to those new mayors and deputy mayors for the terms ahead, and all the best to those councils who are still working through how they're going to deal with those mayoral and deputy mayoral elections in the coming weeks. With, it's a big issue. It's a big question, isn't it? Particularly where you've got a lot of new faces, and those groups are still coming together and forming and norming and all of that sort of storming process that's got to happen over a number of weeks. But they've got to make this decision pretty quickly.
Yeah, I've got to say, around that deputy mayoral question for those smaller shires, my view, I think having two leaders, if you like, two clear leaders, a deputy there is a good thing. And I think there's an opportunity sometimes for that at the moment, and a distinct opportunity for some of those councils, because in the past, they've sometimes, the view is we won't have a deputy because there's an extra cost to the community. There's a higher allowance that they receive. Well, with some of the changes to municipal boundary electoral arrangements, various of the councils have gone down in number, some of those smaller councils. So there has been some savings, but I just do think that it's such a great idea to have, with the mandatory training this time around. We'll be sending mayors and deputy mayors from various councils along to training programs. Having that lone individual from one council going because they don't have a deputy will be pretty stark. But also the idea that the two people are doing the training would be, I just think, you miss something in some training. It's great to have a colleague next to you that you can, what was it they said about that? Supporting each other. I just think it's worth considering, councillors, up to each councillor group what they do here. But I do think that there's some real value in having a deputy mayor. And I've served in that position before as a deputy, and it's really meaningful, and it was a great learning for me. I subsequently became a mayor.
And I think Northern Grampians used the word succession in the discussion about why they've decided to do that. So it does sort of send a signal, I guess, as to where the future leadership perhaps in that council group is going to come from, and prepare them for it.
Yeah.
All right. We might draw a line there under elections of all types for this cycle in Victoria, and pause to find out a bit more about the stats that have come out of our recent weeks with Rhys Thomas at VLGA Central. Time to check in with Rhys Thomas now for this week's segment. It's called Resume Your Position. I'm assuming, Rhys, that now that the elections are over, it's time to get back into the business of governing in local government.
Certainly is, Chris. At least I'd hope the elections were over, but as you've talked about,
yeah.
there's been a hiccup this week.
Yeah, true. Yeah, true. I'd forgotten about that for one moment. But anyway, we'll let that play out. The wash up, you've got some numbers, some stats, some insights.
Yeah, look, I've had a good look now through the outcomes of the election, and there's some positive and some negative. So I just thought I might share some of that because I know a lot of people are sort of interested to see how we landed.
Yes.
So this year there were 2,211 candidates standing for 647 positions. That's 3.4 candidates per position. In 2020, it was 3.5 candidates per position. So it hasn't changed really all that much between.
No.
Now, of those candidates, 421 of them were existing councillors. Again, roughly the same as 2020. The difference, though, this year is that only 2/3 of the councillors who sought re-election were successful. In 2020, that was 3/4. So
that confirms my feeling that it felt like a lot of incumbents falling by the wayside.
it was. And of course, the other factor that those figures don't pick up is councillors perhaps that saw the writing on the wall and decided not even to re-nominate. So
Yeah.
it might be even bigger than that. But the wash up is that there's a lot of new councillors now. So in the councils that are being sworn in as we speak, 57% of councillors are new. So they weren't councillors in the previous term. In 2020, that figure was only 50%. So it's not sheep stations different, but it is a pattern, I think, that is worth commenting on.
What about the single member ward impact? There's been quite a lot of commentary about it through the campaign, hasn't there? And particularly as the counting was happening.
It has, and I've been looking at that, and that was my instinct too. I thought, well, the move to single member wards is clearly going to change the game. And what I did is I've done two things. First, I had a look at one particular council that went through the change, just as a bit of a case study, and I looked at the city of Yarra. Now, in 2020, the city of Yarra had 3 wards with 3 councillors elected in each, and the Greens stood candidates in all 3 of those wards. Now, they got an average of 26.5% of the primary vote, and that was enough to see 5 Greens councillors elected to that council. Fast forward to 2024, and the Greens stood a candidate in every one of the 9 single member wards that now exist. And this time they got 26.8% of the primary vote. So it actually went up ever so slightly. That was only enough to see 2 candidates elected. So you can see the impact of the electoral changes. Now, one of the reasons for that is that the surplus votes from a popular candidate can't flow to other candidates. So the 2 councillors that were elected received something like 35% of the primary votes.
Yeah.
So it's pretty easy to make an argument that single member wards make it easier for community independents with local appeal to get elected at the expense of political parties with a broader appeal. I think that's probably true.
And that was one of the benefits being pushed back when this whole system change came in, wasn't it?
That was part of the argument, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I think, though, all elections, and that case study I've looked at, that's going to be to do with a whole lot of local factors, the strength of those individual candidates, the organisation of opponents, and the political shift in the community in that time. So it's not in itself a definitive measure. A better way is to look at the overall figures. And so I looked at the 27 councils that made the shift from a different electoral model to single member wards, leaving out Casey and Whittlesea for the time being.
Mm-hmm.
So in those councils, 65% of councillors who sought re-election were successful. That's pretty much the same as the overall figure across Victoria. Really, there was no difference.
Right.
Maybe that was because some councillors saw the writing on the wall and didn't nominate. I don't think so, because there's really no measurable difference in the number of new councillors. In fact, only 54% of councillors at those councils are new compared to 57 overall. So I think what I'm saying is the evidence doesn't tell us anything. We've only had one election. There's a whole lot of other factors at play. We probably just don't have enough data to make a position one way or the other.
Okay. All right. That's not helped very much, might I say.
It's very unsatisfactory, I know.
But it's interesting nonetheless. What about the gender issue? There's been a bit of reporting in the last couple of days about missing the target. I think we're about the same, but of course the government wanted to see 50-50 by next year, didn't it?
That's right. And look, we've done some analysis, or I should actually say that Gender Lens Australia, our partners in the delivery of our local Women Leading Change program, have done some analysis for us at the VLGA. And yes, you're right. That headline figure of 43% of women councillors has not shifted. The dial hasn't shifted. And while that's bad news, because we're clearly not going to achieve the 50-50 target, failing some dramatic resignations and shift in by-elections. But, you know, there's maybe some green shoots on it. I think perhaps many were expecting we might have gone backwards given the political climate and some of the stuff we were hearing around the sector, and at least that didn't happen. We do have more women councillors than we've ever had before in Victoria since amalgamations, at least, but that's really only because Whittlesey and Casey have come back into the fold, so the overall pie is bigger. Because we have more men councillors as well. One of the interesting figures we looked at, because we've been working very closely with our members through that local Women Leading Change program on some community leadership programs and other things throughout the term, we've seen that VLGA member councils, 46% was the figure, the percentage of women on those councils, compared to 38% on non-member councils. So that's encouraging.
That's a significant difference.
Yeah, it shows us that the approach we're taking is working. And so we're calling on the state government to support the VLGA in that work and help us turn our minds now to 2028 and strive for gender equality across the sector. We do have one pleasing piece of news, which is that for the first time ever in Victoria, there is at least one woman on every council. So that's something to build on. And although we fell short on this occasion, we won't give up the fight.
And really the fight starts now. It's ongoing, isn't it? You can't sort of wait a year or so and then get into it. You really need to start on it straight away.
Absolutely, you do. And part of that is going to be the impact of the conduct reforms and whether they make the role of councillor a more attractive one for everyone.
Rhys, I don't know if you were surprised. I was a little surprised to see some of the councils getting sworn in almost immediately after the declaration of the poll. Some were very quick off the mark, weren't they?
Yeah, look, that actually didn't surprise me. And one of the reasons for that is the need to undertake induction. Technically speaking, your induction only counts if you're a councillor, so you need to be sworn in first. There's also the issue of you can't pay allowances to councillors until they take the oath. So they're pretty keen to do that. But look, I've noticed all the councils being sworn in. Thankfully, I haven't heard any stories of someone refusing to take the oath or affirmation as yet. So hopefully that doesn't happen, but it's not unprecedented. I did find some examples of councillors that really didn't last very long. In 2016, there was a councillor who resigned just literally minutes after having been declared into the office. In East Gippsland in 2017, a councillor refused to sign the councillor code of conduct, which was part of the process then, and couldn't take up the role. There was a Mornington Peninsula councillor in 2021 who lasted 4 months before decided the role wasn't for them. And I think the best one was a case in Casey councillor in 2017. The councillor lasted 4 months in the job, beating their previous record because they'd been elected in 2003 and only lasted 37 days before they resigned. So hopefully that councillor isn't planning to re-nominate at some point in the future.
Yes, and I do recall at the start of the last term there were quite a few incidents, a particularly tragic one where a councillor was killed in I think it was a helicopter crash.
It was, and in fact that was at Moira Council, and it was probably a sliding doors moment for that council. Who knows how they would have landed if they'd had a slightly different composition in their governing body. Yeah,
true. Good point. All right, that'll be very interesting to see. And of course, after the swearing in happens, a lot of councils have moved already to mayoral elections, which we've talked about with the panel this morning. So we'll see a lot more of that. There's about 68 to go by my count as we record this, Rhys.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm not the only one watching the local government news roundup page to see those results get neatly tallied for easy consumption.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Rhys. That's insightful as always. Are you going to take a break now that we've done that, or have you got more interesting things to share with us next week?
I reckon I've probably got just enough puns to last me through to the end of the year.
Yes.
And then I'll put my feet up.
Excellent. All right. Look forward to see what you've got for us. Thank you, Rhys. Have a great week, and we'll talk soon.
No worries.
So as we barrel towards the end of the year, I believe Rhys has got a few more on his list for cleverly titled segments to get through. We always appreciate those insights, don't we, team?
Yeah.
Now, a couple of stories from beyond Victoria just to touch on before we wrap up. This one's got a Victorian connection. I was really disappointed to see what's playing out at Shoalhaven City Council this week. The CEO there, Robin Stevens, has resigned. Robin was a director at Greater Geelong, you'll remember, and took up the position at Shoalhaven in February of this year. This council's got some big financial challenges. Apparently, after the election, there's some reports around that the new mayor and a couple of councillors were pushing for a leadership change. Ms. Stevens has resigned this week, effective immediately, as I understand it. The union's pretty unhappy. They're saying the councillors there have a plan to slash 500 jobs. The councillors, the deputy mayor in particular, has denied that, but says Ms. Stevens' plan, which included, I think, 19 job cuts and a couple of director positions being absorbed, didn't go far enough. And there's calls for an investigation into the council. They want the local government minister to step in. Not a good look, Tony, when you see this sort of thing playing out. And once again, I think it's a pretty clear case of a CEO getting caught in the political machinations of a particular council.
Yeah, it does have that, smell about it. Although I think, if there's going to be a change, it's probably best to do it at the start, right at the clean. We've got to change the councillors, change the CEO. But look, some big financial issues there that wouldn't be, would have taken many years, I think, to arise. I suspect apparent operating deficit of 37 million, I read in one report. So, and clearly there will be, there is angst among the staff, the unions expressing concerns about forthcoming job cuts. And, if, as you say, the deputy mayor stepped out there, Peter Wilkins, and said, well, the CEO's plan didn't go far enough in terms of cutting. So we've got to assume that that's what the councillors are supporting, either jobs and services being cut in that municipality somehow to address those underlying budget concerns. So I think we'll watch that one, and there's more pain, I think, to take place in Shoalhaven City Council.
But there's been a lot of pain anyway, Tony and Chris, because, they've faced these emergencies, particularly during the 23-24 budget. Apparently during that time, there's been 3 disaster declarations during that time, which has led to, this pressure on the budget. So there's very good reason why there's pressure on the budget, because 3 declarations of emergencies in 1 year is significant. I mean, it's sort of, I don't know of any others off the top of my head that have gone through that amount in 1 year. So, so I can understand why there's a big deficit there, because, it decimates communities, and it takes such a long time for councils to come back from financial pressures like that, from emergencies, because there's an expectation that you'll respond to that, and quickly, but it's really, really difficult. Yeah, it does. I agree with you, Tony. It smells a bit, there's something going on there. It's probably good that there is going to be potentially a review of what's going on there. I believe one of the directors has resigned off the back of the CEO resigning as well, and potentially there could be more that might go as a result of it. So what does that tell you? It's not easy. It's not easy to, as a CEO, to be able to come in and make, huge cuts all at once. It's there's, significant work that needs to be done in relation to that, and you've got to have justification. But anyway, look, it'll be interesting to see what happens to the leadership team there, and whether we see more change as a result of it, and who's going to come in and fix it.
Yeah, well, I would ask, Ms. Stevens has only been there since February. This new council's only been in a couple of months. Has anyone really had enough time to affect any major change here.
Right.
The reports are that she's been doing great work in the organisation to reset the culture, which apparently was absolutely required. There was one report from a site called Spark Shoalhaven that reported on a meeting, apparently an ambush, it was described, of Ms Stevens by the Mayor and a couple of councillors, that was described as inappropriate. And the word was a number of senior people had threatened to walk if Ms Stevens was pushed or forced to resign. So we're already seeing some of that playing out by the sounds of things. So I suspect there'll be a bit more to come on that front at Shoalhaven, unfortunately. All right, we should move on. I know you picked up on this one, Tony, on the Northern Beaches there, where the council is considering a special rate variation over 3 years of between 31.1 and 46%. I'm not sure how that's going to go down in the community, but that's exactly what they're asking the community to respond to.
Yeah, it's pretty extreme when you look at what's our rate cap, 2.75% or something now in Victoria. When you're talking numbers in the 30s and 40, high 40%. There's a process, of course, in New South Wales where if a council is seeking this special variation of rates, as they call it, an SVR, you need to go through a community consultation process before you put your request into IPART, the Independent Pricing and Regulatory Tribunal. And that's what's occurring at Northern Beaches, it seems. And in the community consultation, essentially the question going to that community, that Sydney Suburban Council, is do you want this significant rate increase, or would you like cuts to services? So really interesting to hear what the community feedback is on that. We could perhaps all speculate.
I think we
what's
can predict.
likely to be the answer. I think I know.
Yes, difficult situation that some of these councils are finding themselves in. I noticed just this morning as we record this over in the UK, where we've talked a lot about the financial struggles of councils there. The government has set a cap on council tax increases of 5%, which some people are feeling is too high. That's going to deliver something like an average £100 annual increase for a ratepayer. What Victorian councils could do with 5% as compared to 2.75, hey?
Oh
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. And I guess the one sort of heartening thing is the direction we're going. Like, we started off, I think, the year with inflation at high 3%, 4% in Australia. We're down to, I think, about 2.8%, and it's holding out. That's why interest rates aren't dropping. But if you're like me and you read the economics parts of the papers, if the view seems to be that inflation's going to drop next year, as if we have a trade war, Australia, cheap goods come to Australia, brings inflation down. If China's got to dump its goods somewhere, if they're going to frack in the US and the Ukraine war finishes, that's more Russian oil, more oil, lower petrol prices. Maybe that there's a sunny side to all that, where inflation drops.
A spin-off podcast on economics coming with Tony Rowney, I think.
I did major in economics in my law and commerce course.
Oh, right, okay, that explains.
Just before we wrap up, the issue of confidential councillor briefing sessions is in the news again, this time in New South Wales, where the government's proposing reforms that include the banning of confidential councillor briefing sessions. They would need to be opened up to the public, as is being explored at Mornington Peninsula Shire in Victoria, you might recall. Now, I'm not sure where that's at. We knew it wasn't going to come in before the election. Whether it comes in soon under a new council remains to be seen. But this is an issue, Tony and Julie, that's clearly not going to go away. A lot of councils are up in arms in Sydney about this, saying they're an important part of an efficient governance process, but others disagree.
Yeah, and it's interesting that they're saying, the councils are saying, all you're going to do is force everything underground. You know, you're going to force us to, take this offline somewhere else, because they want to be able to have these confidential conversations to ensure that they get all the information that they need and can have some open conversations without criticism from the public, etc. So they are. It's Sydney, Hornsby, Camden, and Mossman that are apparently saying, no, this is not going to work. You're just going to drive all these other, conversations that are going to happen behind the scenes anyway. So. It's an interesting argument, but I actually think it's true. I think that's what will happen, because they'll still want to have some discussions between themselves, knowing that they can't, vote on anything, but
Yeah.
they'll still
Tony,
want
is there a double standard here? Governments that have, cabinet processes that are not open to the public and are very secret
that's
and
right.
remain so for a period of time, insisting that those sort of discussions at the local level have to happen in open?
Yeah, indeed. It's a case that, cabinet briefings, there's a protocol there. They're entirely in confidence, aren't they? So, yeah, I think that's not atypical. We've talked often about, rules about conflicts and all that in other, in the legislature, and yet they'll make it much more different, stricter regime for local government. I think I've said here on TGU before that I think that there's a need for there to be a forum where councillors can explore issues, ask questions without that element of grandstanding. I think that the public transparency push that's on now, I have a lot of sympathy for that, and I think what we probably ought to see is those councils that don't have some sort of minute-taking regime for briefings, forum, workshop, whatever you call it at your council. I think there probably ought to be some minutes, not, and then Tony said this and then Julie said that, but, so-and-so came in to brief us on this issue. We heard from this individual, that individual, and that is a public set of minutes published on the website. To me, that some councils already do that, but I think that would be, I think that would be a good development if we saw more of that. And there's a task, I guess, for the incoming replacement for John Baker at Mornington Peninsula Shire Council, whoever that is. One of the early things will be, what is the regime for this, open public briefings? Because there'll still need to be scenarios where we move in camera to discuss certain matters, and what will be the trigger for that? How will that be done? What will be the rules about grandstanding? We have different conversations when we know potentially our constituents are, out there looking at us. There's a temptation sometimes to either not say something because you might look stupid, so not ask a question, or maybe say it in a much more, forceful, confident, direct manner that might not actually be conducive to good sort of relationships among the group.
All important considerations. All right, we'll see how that one plays out. That move in New South Wales is going to Parliament, I think, in draft legislation later this month. So we'll see whether the government holds firm on its position there. All right, team. I think that's it for this week. Tony, enjoy those very attractive surrounds there in Yarriambiack. Thank you for dialing in. Good internet, obviously, in Yarriambiack.
Yes.
Oh, brilliant stuff.
Excellent. And Julie, I think you're in the LGX office, aren't you, this morning? So thank you.
I am. Yeah. Out and about, but essentially in the LGX office. Great to see you both, and have a great week.
Thank you, as always. We will see you next week for more TGU from VLGA Connect. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or on your podcast player to keep up to date with everything that's coming for you from VLGA Connect. Until next time, bye for now.